Hello, everyone, and welcome to tcworld Conference, our second virtual conference. And as well, our second time with the topic, how can we support users in shaping a relevant mental model? As we had some technical issues, fingers crossed this morning, everything runs smoothly. My name is Jule Fisch, and I'm a dual student at TCOM, and I will be your moderator today. To give you the chance to interact with each other, we have set up a chat room that will be opened after the session, and you are welcome to join a discussion with the other participants afterwards. Before we begin, I'd like to encourage you to submit any question that you may have during the presentation by typing them into the question section, which you can see in your control panel. You may send them and address them at any time, and we will collect them and address them in the Q&A session at the end of today's presentation. Also, if you have any technical issues, please tell us via the question function. And now I would like to pass over the word to our speaker, Jonathan. It's great to have you here today.
Yeah, thank you very much. So thanks for having me here, and thanks for joining my session titled, How Can We Support Users in Shaping a Relevant Mental Model? So the purpose of my talk today is that you will learn what is a mental model and how can we as technical communicators support users in shaping one. Okay, before we start, let me just give you a short introduction of who I am. So I am a technical communicator, I guess like most of you, and I'm employed at a company called Excosoft, and I work as an information architect. And I work with XML-based content management, so I have some background in the development of the DITA standard back in the days, which was a lot of fun. I'm also interested in user behavior, and my PhD was about users searching and reading behaviors and how that would impact the design of technical communication. So some of the things that I gained through my knowledge, I will share with you today. So I work for a company called Excosoft, and we are a vendor of a component content management system called Scribenta, which is used by, these are some of the companies that are creating, managing, translating, and publishing their technical documentation in Scribenta. So we help these companies to optimize their content management, basically. Okay. So what is a mental model then? Let us start with users, because our focus is, of course, always on our users. So users are using your company products. It can be a software, a device, a machine. I will call it tool from now on. And for the most part, their interaction runs smoothly. So there's a chain of interaction. User is doing an action, triggers the tool to give a response, their dialogue or something happens, which triggers another action on the user's end. So there's a chain of interaction until the goal is accomplished. But we know from time to time that users get stuck, they experience a problem. They can't make sense. So there's this very fundamental aspect of how we humans behave to try to make sense, to try to understand, to try to explain what it is that we see. And this concept is what I call a mental model. And it sort of lives in the working memory. So it's kind of a mental representation of the tool. And this mental model can be conceptual, so it can sort of give the user an understanding of how the tool works. It can be procedural, telling the user which steps the user needs to do to accomplish a goal. And if the user is able to shape a relevant mental model, they can get back on track. They can resolve that problematic situation. But we also know that users, many times, they do get stuck. They cannot resolve that situation from their own knowledge. Then they go and seek help. So they go to your company's technical documentation. And here's the thing, that they will then try to shape a mental model from interacting with your content, by reading, for example. And hopefully they become successful. They can accomplish the goals and they can actually do what they set out to do. So from this point of view, from my point of view, the main purpose of technical communication is to support the users in shaping a relevant mental model. so that they can learn how to accomplish the task that they set out to do. But what is this mental model then? Let's try it out together. So I'm going to ask you to read some sample text, and then I'm going to ask you a question. You can write your answer in the chat, and then Julie will try to pick some answers. We can see if we can have a dialogue. So let's start. Please read this sample text. See if you can figure out what is this all about? What is the procedure here? So I don't know, Julie, do you see there's any suggestions?
Not yet. So probably our participants may wake up at first.
Yeah. It might be difficult because this comes from a reading comprehension handbook. So it's on purpose made that it's difficult to shape a mental model from reading this text alone, to figure out what is this all about. But let us
so
take exactly.
We have one answer is laundry.
That's a good choice, a good suggestion, because that is what it's all about. If we add a title and an image, then hopefully you can shape a mental model, because you can connect the text to your prior knowledge about washing clothes, because I hope all of you have that experience or that knowledge. So we then can tell what is procedure, what is items, what is groups. So the thing here that now when we had a title and the image, you can shape a mental model, and you can sort of get a more understanding of what this text is all about. Before, without the title and the image, that was kind of impossible. So the message here is that we need some kind of prior knowledge to be able to shape a mental model. So let's explore that a little bit more in detail. So here we have a user who is interacting with the interface. It could be text in the manual, it could be the tool interface. And the user is reading certain words and icons, and is hopefully able to connect to knowledge that this person has. The person has knowledge about air, about filters in general, about machines, that things work. And through being able to sort of activate that knowledge, then the user can shape a mental model. And in this case, how the machine ABC works. And from knowing how this thing works, then the user might be able to shape a procedure mental model on which steps you need to do to maybe disassemble their filter. Okay, I need to do this and that step before that step, because this is the way the tool works. Once the user is able to shape a relevant mental model, I would say this is the case of learning. So the user is actually in a shape of learning things. Then there is a process of internalization to create or develop new knowledge in the long-term memory, which can be activated later on with users interacting with the actual machine. So this kind of interaction with the environment, prior knowledge, shaping a mental model is a process of learning and development. But what type of knowledge do we need then to be able to shape a relevant mental model? So again, if you could read this text and write in the chat, what do you think this is all about? If you close your eyes, can you see a situation?
Okay, I have an answer. Girl kicks ball into window.
Yes, some of you have figured it out. So if you are a native English speaker, this might make sense. You can shape a mental model. So let's replace 3 words. So now for us who are not native English speakers, this might make more sense. So if you close your eyes, maybe you're at your grandmother's backyard, it's summer. So what we did here is that we replaced 3 words. So gal became girl, pigskin is football, casement is window. So what this example tells us is that we need knowledge about language to be able to shape a mental model. And yeah, this is something we know as technical communicators, that we need to know about our audience and what we assume that they know, for instance, about language, so pick the right words. Okay, let's take another example. So you can read and then tell me, why did this person decide not to cross the desert?
Okay, for now we don't have an answer.
So this is kind of a little bit tricky. So of course, these two sentences might not make sense at first. How are they related? So what has the first sentence to do with the other? Let's replace one word. So the last word in the second sentence. So we actually replaced desert with lake.
Okay, we have something. The man does not eat the desert to not getting heavier.
Yeah, that could be. That is an interesting answer. So the second sampler, we replaced one word. Hopefully you can activate your knowledge, domain knowledge about winter, about ice, about lakes, saying that during winter, the lake freezes and they have a thin layer of ice. And if you step over it, it will break and you will fall into cold water. So the person decided not to cross the lake because they didn't want to fall into cold water. But all of that is actually not stated here in these two sentences. You infer all of that from activating your domain knowledge about winter, ice, and lakes. And you can infer and you can feel that these two sentences make sense together. So this message, this example tells us that we also need to have domain knowledge to be able to shape a relevant mental model. So we need knowledge about language and the domain. So given that these two are very important, of course, the knowledge that we might have might be kind of incomplete, you could say, which means that the mental model is also incomplete. It's not perfectly clear. We understand parts of the tool, but other aspects are a little bit fuzzy. Furthermore, the knowledge that we have might be in a contradiction to what we read. So we do a misconceptual reading. We think we have understood. We think we feel to have shaped a mental model, but it's a misunderstanding. Let's look at an example of that. So try to read this text and see if you can figure out what is the size of the stone, this stone part of this text. So maybe it's also difficult to, I mean, this is kind of confusing because there's a contradiction here. So if we look at the words in bold here, it means that a user would read this and then would be asked a week later to remember, what did you read? Did you read about someone putting something in their pocket? They say, no, I don't remember that. So the thing in bold here would be rejected or ignored because it contradicts our knowledge about the world. So to put the stone in the pocket, the stone had to be really big to smash the cottage. And then the man had to be really big to put the stone in his pocket. And then his home had to be really big, but then the stone had to be even bigger. So it's kind of Doesn't make sense. So things that contradicts our knowledge about, in this case, the world, or domain knowledge, we would ignore and reject. That's a typical case. And that's a problem for technical documentation, of course, if the user will ignore and reject things that is stated in the text. So let's look at the last example. So again, read a short text. And I put it away because we don't spend a lot of time on reading things when we try to find and make sense. So the question here, there was a person involved here, and that person had a role, an occupation. So did you figure out what role that person had?
The typo leads to a wrong concept.
So it's kind of confusing. So to show you, the person here was a composer, a gardener, not a composer. So a gardener can also be someone who creates fabulous music, of course. But the thing here is that when I showed you the photo of the concert hall and the piano, you activated your domain knowledge about concert halls and pianos. And in such typical domain, there is a composer, maybe not a composer. So when reading the text, most readers, as the research suggests, is that they will read composer, which is a misconceptual reading. So they misunderstand, in some sense, you could call it, since it was a composer. So this is, of course, also the case for technical documentation. The user interacts with a tool and shapes a mental model from the interaction, finds something in the manual or finds something from the chatbot, reads it, and do a misconceptual reading. And then says, the manual is useless because it didn't support me. Well, so these are kind of aspects that happens when we read. So we know that knowledge about language and the domain is very central to be able to shape a relevant mental model. So how can we then support users? What are the options that we have? I will depict 3 different design approaches. So of course, we can support the user by that the user is reading our content. We can also encourage the user to explore the tool. This is what we call minimalism. And the third option, something that I'm interested in, is called reading with your hands. So yeah, let's look into these 3 different approaches. So this is, of course, something that is familiar to us. We design content which the user is reading. And by reading with eyes, and maybe also from audiovisual content like a YouTube video, the user is shaping a mental model from that reading process. So there's 2 central types of information then, the instruction, step-by-step procedure. The user can then shape a procedural mental model. And also conceptual information. And conceptual information can be functional, so it can describe how the tool works. It can be structural, describing what parts the tool consists of and how they relate. And by shaping a mental model that is conceptual, the user is then hopefully able to infer and shape a procedural mental model by knowing that, okay, it works like this, then I must do that step first because there's a relation, that part fits to that part, etc. Now, when it comes to sort of working with users' misconceptual reading, there's this technique of refuting users' misconception. So we can actually highlight within our design saying that the user becomes aware of that they might have a misconception. Let's say, for example, that you know that your audience thinks that the Earth is flat. And you're writing in your text that Earth is a sphere. You could say in the text that, hey, some readers might think that the Earth is flat, but that's actually a misconception. The Earth is a sphere, which makes the user aware of that. Yeah, maybe I am wrong, and maybe the writer here is right. So they can work and being aware of their misconception. That would be called to refute readers' misconception. So no, that's something you could try, of course, to do in your technical documentation. Okay, the second example, which we normally call minimalism. That is to encourage the user to go out and explore the tool and shape a mental model from their own discovery. That is, they should not primarily shape a mental model from reading content, but from their interaction with the tool. And this is typically what we call minimalism. And I think there is a kind of a misconception among technical communicators, because I often hear that we say that a minimalism has a relation to the size of the volume, the amount of words in our content. That the aim of minimalism is to reduce, to get to the core, and to slash verbiage and to cut pages. And from my point of view, in my reading of minimalism, is that might be a consequence of adopting minimalism. So from my point of view, minimalism means to enforce minimal obstruction on the user's learning by doing path. What does that mean? Well, it means that documentation needs to be as little as possible in the way of users learning by doing path. So this is learning that is shaping a mental model by their interaction. So these 4 design principles that we all know about, that choose an action-oriented approach means to encourage the user to go directly out and do meaningful or do tasks. The user should not be spent time on reading introductions and concepts and things. So get the user out to do tasks directly. So the first page in the manual needs to be an instruction. And it has to be meaningful. It has to be anchored in the domain of where the user is doing their tasks. So it has to be, basically meaningful. The user will commit errors when exploring and trying out and trying to make sense. That is, shape a mental model from their discovery. So the minimalist instruction needs to support the user to recognize they are doing an error and how to recover. And also support the user in going into and finding a piece of content without having to read the documentation from binder to binder. And so these approaches has given our ideas topic-based authoring and to standards like DITA. So this is an interesting way of supporting the user to shape a relevant mental model. Now, I think there's 2 criteria that needs to be in place to support the user when it comes to, let's say, the more traditional kind of content, the first example, and the minimalist instruction, second example. Because the user, of course, needs to search and find the instruction or the content that is relevant for their task, and then understand it. That is, shape a mental model from their reading. That's a 2 steps that we can't sort of skip. And this might be an issue for the novice user who's trying to find their way through your product. So let's look at examples of how the novice user would end up having challenges. So here we have Eric. He's a person who's using a software, and he is trying to upload a file. He's getting stuck, and he's trying to find an instruction. So he's Googling and finding out, so he finds something. Now, to find something is not difficult. Just Google or open page 23 in the manual. The problem or the challenge is to judge if this is relevant to what I'm doing. So let's say that he would find an instruction how to download a file. If he lacked the knowledge about language and the domain, he would not be able to shape a mental model from reading. So we say, I don't get it, I skip it. If he would have certain domain knowledge, maybe he would shape a mental model and saying, but this is about downloading a file. So that's not for me, so I skip it. Let's say that he would have knowledge and he does this misconceptual reading. So he thinks that, but this is about uploading the file. Great. So he starts to follow the steps and he fails because, well, the instruction was for downloading, not as he thought, uploading. Let's say that he would find an instruction on how to actually upload. Again, if he lacked relevant knowledge about language and the domain, he would not be able to shape a mental model and he would skip it. Let's say that he had some, and he would misunderstand this. Again, do a misconceptual reading and saying, but this is about downloading a file. Not for me, skip it. Let's say that, he do shape a mental model and think, but this is relevant for me. This is about uploading a file. But then he does this misconceptual reading because there's a contradiction somewhere. So one step he actually misunderstands. So when he tries to do it, he will fail. Okay, let's say that he do shape a relevant mental model, saying that, okay, now I know this is about uploading a file. My mental model is relevant for then uploading a file, but still he would fail. How can that be? Well, it could be that his work task as a novice beginner user is misconceptual. So he's trying to create a new file in the software. And he thinks that from his knowledge that, yeah, maybe I need to upload a file because that's what I did in other software that I used before. But that's not how you create a new file. So his whole idea of the work task is misconceptual. So the example here is that for the beginner user, it's kind of challenge to search and to understand what you read. So there's a chicken or the egg problem, because isn't that the essence of what we've been talking about today? Is that you usually need to have knowledge about language and the domain in order to find and shape a mental model from what you're reading. But isn't it the purpose of searching or reading to gain knowledge? So what comes first? Okay, so how can we sort of work? How can we support then the novice user? That's what I'm trying to and been studying and is interested in. And there's one approach called reading with your hands. So what that means is basically that the user is not only using their eyes, but also their hands to shape a mental model. But for this approach, we need to look into a little bit how users learn to do tasks. So I have an example of two maintenance technicians, Eric and Anna. So Eric is a new employee in this workshop, and Anna is the senior expert supporting him to learn. So let's look at Eric's sort of performance of learning tasks. So the first week, he actually knows how to disassemble the air filter. He has the domain knowledge, so he can do it by himself. At the same time, in this first week, he can learn to do a more complex task like assemble the carburetor if he gets the support from Anna, so he can learn. So Anna is there to point and to support him to recover from errors and explain things. So Anna's support allows Eric to shape a mental model that's relevant. At the same time, there are other tasks which are even more difficult. So he can't actually learn even if Anna would support him because they are too complex. He lacks really the domain knowledge. The second week, when he has internalized what he learned the first week, he has developed knowledge. So now the knowledge about the carburetor is in his, say, long-term memory. So he can activate it and he can assemble the carburetor independently by himself. At the same time, he is now in a position where he can start to learn the even more complex task, assemble the gearbox. And configure electronics is still too difficult. And so it goes. So the third week, he internalizes. Now he can assemble the gearbox by himself, and he is in a position to learn if Anna supports him. So we see here that we'll start to learn basic tasks, and then the knowledge about the domain and language is growing. We can learn more and more complex tasks. So the third week, maybe now Eric, he can now start to search and read or interact with chatbots to shape a mental model from interacting with the content. But the first week, he would have these challenges that we talked about. So what would be the ways then to support Eric in the beginning? If I'm not Anna, who can be present and actually support him face-to-face in real time? Well, one is to do exercises where you use your hands. So this idea here is that the user is creating a conceptual mental model from laying a puzzle by moving your hands and trying to lay the puzzle. You shape a mental model while you move your hands and you self-regulate, you do things. So the user is giving here symbols called tangible tokens, which symbolizes different things on a device or a tool or a software. And there's also a scaffold. So there's a minimalist kind of instruction that encourages the user to assemble, laying the puzzle so that you create a result model. It is right here. So this is kind of making the mental model as a tangible artifact that you can actually physically see. So it's kind of building the mental model with your hands. And this scaffold instruction is kind of like the minimalist instruction, encouraging the user to not explore the tool, but explore the symbols. So thereby, the users can then get sort of big picture and grasping how things relate. This is something that we're using in our Scribenta trainings in the company, so that the beginner user is getting exercises to build what we call is the Scribenta house, to understand how important concepts fit together and the relationship with things that they can see also in the interface. It seems that this is kind of getting the user to getting a grip of and shaping a relevant mental model, and then we can build on that in further exercises. So of course, there's more research needs to be done to use this kind of approach. So if you want to read more about this, there's some literature that is available, of course. So what would then be the kind of conclusion if we try to wrap up? Well, I think one conclusion that at least I make is that this one. So users must be knowledgeable. They have to have at least some level of domain knowledge and knowledge about the language of your products to be able to find and understand your content, which is of course for the beginner user, the novice user, this is of course a challenge. So the advice here would be to kind of not force a beginner user to search and read, so not embed content for the beginner user within technical documentation. If it's a PDF or an HTML help with taxonomy, so if it's a chatbot, so see if you can find other ways to support the beginner users so that they can start to establish some level of domain knowledge and knowledge about the language of your products in that sense. So yeah, so then based on this conclusion, I think if you have any questions, I'll be happy to discuss. I think I have some minutes left.
All right. At first, thanks, Jonathan, for your presentation and for sharing your knowledge and experience with our audience. Let's see if there are any questions left at the moment. You can as well use our chat function in our TCOM Live. So there is one question: what would you consider laying symbols on approach related to helping users build a practical algorithmic understanding of the problem?
Now that's a interesting, if I understand it correct, so algorithmic, so kind of a little bit more abstract.
A practical workflow.
Yeah. One idea with the result model is that it's called result model because these tangible symbols, they reference or symbolizes results that you can do in the tool. So it's tangible also from a tool perspective, tangible results that are meaningful. So now as I showed you, the Scribenta house is more conceptual, so how things relate. But there's an alternative which I actually would like to try out, and that is to use other symbols to pinpoint what parts do you create first. So first you create this result, and then you can create another. So there's a way of putting symbols to actually be able to learn what do you do first, then you can do something else, etc. So I think that's possible. I think we need probably more knowledge and experience of using these symbols to provide a procedural mental model, but I'm sure it's possible.
Okay. So now it's time to submit any other questions if you have one. So one more question. Can you suggest some ways to put your conclusions into practice? Overview diagrams, video tutorials?
Yeah, I think especially one thing that I would suggest avoid is to support the beginner user, that they force them to kind of search and read a lot of text. That's not suitable. So I would say that, for instance, how-to videos is a good approach to support also novice user. There's this kind of learning where you see someone doing the task, and then you can imitate. That's also a way to learn, which is kind of effectful. So we are, as humans, we're used to look at an expert and then imitate, try to follow. So that's also a way for a beginner user to start to learn. So I would say that audiovisual content like how-to videos is a good approach also for beginner users, because then they can shape a mental model also from trying to imitate and try to follow.
All right. One more question, or actually a few. Mental model is very individual aspect. How to take this into account when writing from many individuals?
Yeah, that is actually, it's a really good question, and it's a big challenge if we are writing for a global audience. So I guess this comes down to understanding our users and understanding what kind of domain knowledge and knowledge about language do we assume that they need to possess. And that might be different depending on different parts of the world, different cultures who we are talking to. So I guess the way we do it is to try to understand our users. We do create personas, we try to create target groups and to describe what do we assume that they know. And we can also state that, I think, in documentation, that this piece of content assumes that you know this about the domain, about the product. You know, you're familiar with these words, so that user can then check and see, do I fulfill the requirements of the knowledge that is needed? But this is a challenge for when writing for sort of a global audience, as we do as technical communicators. So my answer would be it's about understanding the audience. That's a very important aspect.
Okay, one more question. What if your users are experts who tend to disregard safety messages? Do you have any idea how to make them more attentive?
Yeah, so if I understand the question right, if we have the expert users who they are expert because they have a lot of domain knowledge and also knowledge about language of the products. Of course, that knowledge might be in some sense misconceptual. So they are expert. They say, I know this, but that's actually wrong. So they read a warning message and say, I don't need that. That's wrong. I don't need to pay attention to that because I know how to do. I think that's also, of course, a problem when experts' knowledge is misconceptual. So I think from the research literature, one way of mitigating that is to use this refutational principle to actually highlight and make the user aware of that they might have a misconception and what the consequence is of not following the advice. And I think also I understand there's this safety labeling standard. I think it's called ANSI Z 535 and IEC 68103 something. The standard for hazardous statements, which says that the statement has to first tell what is the danger, what is the consequence of not following the advice, and how should you avoid the danger. So it has three parts, which then allows the user to become aware of what the consequence is if you ignore it. So I think that standard is built from the principle of trying to make the user aware of what the consequence is and that they have a misconception. So that might be one kind of standard to look into that has such statements.
All right, one last question. Was your example using Anna and Eric a scenario-based design approach to relate an example?
I guess you could say that Eric and Anna are actually, well, not real persons, but they are developed from scenarios that I've been studying. I'm using an ethnographic approach when studying users. So they reassemble in some sense people that I have learned to observe and their behaviors, which was in a workshop. So it's kind of, in some sense, it's based on a real learning scenario where users learn basic tasks and then they learn more advanced tasks. And I'm also using my theoretical perspective comes from a guy called Vygotsky. So it's a social-cultural theoretical perspective on how we learn and develop knowledge. So I do have a specific, or I have a perspective on what learning means. That's from a cognitive perspective.
All right, thank you very much. Thanks to all the participants today. We hope you enjoyed this session. And it's not too late to register for more sessions of the tcworld conference program. The recordings of all sessions will be available for 3 months and can be accessed via your dashboard in the conference tool. And thank you, Jonathan, again. Yeah, everybody else who joined. Have a good rest of your day and bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye. Thank you all. Bye-bye.